Hey guys, it's Penelope in London, and what I'm going to do is read to you this from this book, Aeon, and it's Carl Gustav Jung. I'm going to read the first chapter, which is to do with the ego. And to understand the ego further, I am in part into evolutionary astrology. I read charts, and the thing that we have, if we, understand the depths of to be human on this planet, is that we have a soul and also we have a personality, and the ego is part of our personality that is formed through imprints as we develop from childhood into adulthood. And the early imprints are in our subconscious, below our radar. We don't, we may play out things in our adult life that we don't understand, or we might have wounding that has taken place which has not been integrated. And it's really important to understand, for me, from both perspectives, the ego, which is given a bad rap in spirituality because it's highly misunderstood. Like, people will say things like, oh, you've got to get rid of your ego. Well, we have a healthy ego. We have different types of ego. We have the healthy ego, we can have an unhealthy ego, we can have a super ego, which is the parental voice, which will, maybe keep us down, and, depending on what we experienced as children. So I'm going to talk about the moon as well. There was a moon that took place on the March the 10th, March 9th, 10th, 2020, which was our lead up to the first week of lockdown globally, bit by bit countries closing down, which is really important because at the moment what we're working with is solving the problems of the ego. And as Jung said, we have the problem is not the world, it's to do with the psyche of man. And this is what we're suffering from. So a lot of our fears and anxieties and our emotions are tied into security, and that's also part of the ego. If we look at the ruler of Cancer, which in astrology, which is to do with the moon, ego, it's to do with the womb, it's our childhood environment, it's to do with children, the home, it's our roots, it's our inner world where we're nurtured, and protection. It's where we can have neglect and feel helpless and needs. It's about our needs, our emotions. It's about our self-image as well, and where we can be touchy and subjective. It's gender roles, the housewife and husband as example. It's our security, protection, mother and family, and the clan and our ancestors. So it covers, in astrology, it covers a huge area, and it's what's below, it's the lowest part of the chart. It's what's not seen. And then as I read this, I'm going to go forward one slide and show you this moon. And this moon was March the 9th, 2020. It was a full moon, and it was the moon in Virgo, and it was at 1936 degrees. And that moon, this is actually a picture of that moon, of that day. And this was the week of COVID coming to light to humanity. And the moon was in Virgo, and it was where our feelings of safety and were related, to order and clarity, even in emotions. So I'll read this better. Your feeling of safety is now related to order and clarity, and even in emotions. You may have a need to organize everything chaotic and disorganized around us. And with that, it was trying to be more tolerant and accepting the imperfections of life. And it's better to trust life and let it run its own way. Not everything must be according to our expectations. So this was a pivotal moon. And the reason was, when I show you the chart of this moon, you're going to understand what I'm referring to. But now I'm going to go back a slide as I read from this book, chapter 1 on the ego, Carl Gustav Jung. So he says, investigation of the psychology of the unconscious confronted me with facts which required the formation of new concepts. One of the concepts is the concept of self. The entity so denoted is not meant to take place of the one that has always been known as the ego, but includes it in a superordinate concept. We understand the ego as complex as the complex factor to which all conscious contents are related. So what he's saying is all conscious contents are related to what we call the ego. It forms, as it were, the center of the field of consciousness, and insofar as this comprises the empirical personality, the ego is the subject of the personal acts of consciousness. The relation of a psychic content to the ego forms the criterion of its consciousness, for no content can be conscious unless it is represented to a subject. With this definition, we have described and delimited the scope of the subject. Theoretically, no limits can be set to the field of consciousness, since it is capable of indefinite extension. Empirically, however, it always finds its limit when it comes up against the unknown. So if we think about that, we always have understanding, which is quite Saturn, it's quite Saturn-based, but then we come up against the unknown, which would be Neptunian or, the Jupiter, Sagittarius, the bigger picture, the unknown. And relating this to astrology, that's what I'm doing. Empirically, however, it always finds its limit when it comes up against the unknown. This consists of everything we do not know, which therefore is not related to the ego as the center of the field of consciousness. So he's saying the ego is the center of the field of consciousness. So we can see how when people say, in spirituality, you want to get rid of your ego, it's not the correct terminology, because the ego is the center of the field of consciousness. Going on, Jung says, the unknown falls into two groups of objects. Those which are outside can be experienced by the senses, and those which are inside are experienced immediately. The first group comprises the unknown in the outer world. The second, the unknown, is the inner world. We call this latter territory the unconscious. So the unconscious would be in evolutionary astrology. It would be to do with Pluto, what lays below the unconscious. It's also could be related to the sign of Cancer and the moon as well, because that's below, our early imprints as well, which are unconscious. And we can dig deeper on the archetypes of the astrology meaning of that. Jung also in 1911, he began to use astrology with his clients that he worked with, or patients, however you want to reference that. Going on, what he's saying here is the ego as a specific content of consciousness is not a simple or elementary fact, but a complex one which as such cannot be described exhaustively. Experience shows that it rests on two seemingly different bases, the somatic and the psychic. The somatic basis is inferred from the totality of endosomatic perceptions, which for their part are already of a psychic nature and are associated with the ego and are therefore conscious. They are produced by endosomatic stimuli, and only some of which cross the threshold of consciousness. A considerable portion of these stimuli occurs unconsciously, that is, subliminally. The fact that they are subliminal does not necessarily mean that their status is merely physiological, any more than this would be true of a psychic content. Sometimes they are capable of crossing the threshold, that is, of becoming perceptions, but there is no doubt that a large proportion of these endosomatic stimuli are simply incapable of consciousness and are so elementary that there is no reason to assign them a psychic nature, unless, of course, one favors the philosophical view that all life processes are psychic anyway. The chief objection is to this hardly demonstrable hypothesis is that it enlarges the concept of the psyche beyond all bounds and interprets the life process in a way not absolutely warranted by facts. Concepts that are too broad usually prove to be unsuitable instruments because they are too vague and nebulous. I have therefore suggested the term psychic to be used only where there is evidence of a will of capable modifying reflex or instinctual processes. Here I must refer the reader to my paper on the nature of the psyche, where I have discussed this definition of the psychic at somewhat greater length. The somatic basis of the ego consists then of conscious and unconscious factors. The same is true of the psychic base. On the one hand, the ego rests on the total field of consciousness, and on the other, on the sum of the total unconscious contents. These fall into three groups. First, temporarily subliminal contents that can be reproduced voluntary, memory, like how to cross the road, to give you an example. Second, unconscious contents that cannot be reproduced voluntary. So we could say that maybe looking at our dream state, we go to sleep, we dream, that's to do with our psyche and the unconscious, and we can't produce that, it can't be reproduced. Third, contents that are not capable of becoming conscious at all. Group 2 can be inferred from the spontaneous eruption of subliminal contents into consciousness. Group 3 is hypothetical. It is a logical inference from the facts underlying Group 2. It contains contents which have not yet erupted into consciousness, or which never will. When I said that the ego rests on the total field of consciousness, I do not mean that it consists of this. Were that so, it would be indistinguishable from the field of consciousness as a whole. The ego is the only latter point of reference, grounded on and limited by somatic factors described above. Although its bases are in themselves relatively unknown and unconscious, the ego is a conscious factor par excellence. It is even acquired empirically speaking during the individual's lifetime. It seems to arise in the first place from a collision between the somatic factor and the environment. So there's a collision. So, as a child, and we think of the breast, like the baby going to the breast of the mother's milk, the baby has there's something going on there that's deeper, a psychic understanding that's deeper than we get. It's like a knowingness and the unconscious and becoming conscious and the imagination, and through pictures and touch and the somatic feeling space that we have in our body, and the feelings that a baby would be having, them being given the breast milk and then being close to mother, as an example. That's the somatic factor. So the somatic factor in the environment, and once established as a subject, it goes on to develop from further collisions with the outer world and the inner. Despite the unlimited extent of its bases, the ego is never more and never less than conscious as a whole. As a conscious factor, the ego could theoretically at least be described completely, but this would never amount to more than a picture of the conscious personality. All those features are unknown or unconscious to the subject would be missing. A total picture would have to include these, but a total description of the personality, even in theory, absolutely impossible, because the unconscious portion of it cannot be grasped cognitively. The unconscious portion as an experience has absolutely shown it by no means unimportant. So continuing here, I'm going to read on a bit more. And he says that the chief objection to this hardly demonstrable hypothesis is that it enlarges the concept of the psyche beyond all bounds and interprets the life process and in a way not absolutely warranted by facts, concepts that are too broad usually to prove the unsuitable instruments because they are too vague and nebulous. I have therefore suggested the term psychic. So I just read that bit. So what I want to explain now is that you can go further. I want, if you get this book, you can get a PDF copy on the internet. So let's now do a new share, or actually I'm going to go forward one. So I want to show you that moon was in Virgo, March the 9th, 2020, because I want to go forward into the chart now to explain the ego and the personality and, the unconscious. And the next book that goes with this volume 9 of Jung would be the archetypes and the collective unconscious. And there's, how do we know things like, we absolutely know, as things as a baby that, the mother's breast, the milk, the such like, that we have something beyond the ego and ego self. So, as the feminine, the masculine, we can also, include the anima and the animus that Jung talks about. and that we both have the female, the feminine has the male aspect, and the male has the female aspect that we really need to look at. And the shadow work is that's what's unconscious in us that we basically need to bring to light in order to deal with the stopping of projecting unnecessarily, so because we're going to be projecting maybe on some archetypal unconscious stuff, but also we're going to project on our early imprints and our society and what we see. We see a lot of this going on right now, and some people will refer to that as narcissism, but narcissism has been given a bit of a bad rap as well, because the first couple of years of life as a child, you know, we are a ball of narcissism in that it's all about us. But as we grow and develop and the ego develops, a healthy ego, we understand, you know, that there are others. So this is why we need to look at the terminology of what we, you know, talk about with people. When people say, let go, it's your ego, it's not that simple. So really do question. This is a beautiful picture of maybe the idea of, you know, we come into the world and we want to be goddess-like, and then this picture here looks at the warrior type in us as well, which is quite beautiful. And then this picture, you know, the nurturing side of us and the fear of not having fear, and looking at the bigger picture of just the idea that pictures, as Jung said, you know, the imagination and the psyche, they're all linked in. Like as we see something, we'll come to a conclusion about it. So sight would have been used, I guess, very much would have been one of our first things being on Earth that would have been more developed than the vocal cords, you know, and also when we're born, pre 2 or 3, 4, 5 years old, we're not using the voice so much. We're using the visual images, which are how we decide what we look at will bring us to feel a certain way about a certain thing. So I'm going to do a new share and bring up this emanated chart now. And what I want you to see, this is the moon that happened, the full moon in Virgo that occurred around the time of the week of the COVID really kicking in. So we can see Mars up here, and Mars is to do with our libido. Now, libido in the terms of Carl Gustav Jung is not to do so much with our sexual libido. It's to do with the psyche, libido, and our impulsiveness, as well as our wants and our desires. So, you know, let's say you want to climb, you know, Mount Everest as an example. You're going to plan and prepare for that, and you're going to have a goal. And Mars is part of conscious, but also unconscious as well, because of the way that we look or feel about things, you know, our impulsivity, and also who we like, you know, like with our sexual feelings, you know, who we desire and who we like. And Mars is also related to Pluto, which is the depths of the unconscious, which would be to do with Jung's work. I'm not saying it is to do with Jung's work, but I'm describing here. So when we have the South Node also at that time, in the sign of Capricorn, and we had the North Node in the sign of Cancer, which was to do with our inner needs and security, which if we go back to what I was saying about the moon and the ego as well, and we would have been going through this phase at this time. And if I push this chart forward in a moment, but we've also got Neptune, which is beyond this realm, it was on the sun. So this would have been, you know, quite a confusing time for humanity. We also had Chiron, which is our hypersensitivity, early imprinting and wounding from childhood, conjunct Lilith, which is to do with the shadow. Then we also had, this is an amazing chart looking back on hindsight, we had Uranus, and those were in Aries. Then we had Uranus conjunct Venus, and Uranus is breaking free of limitations. And Venus is to do with our inner needs and our desires as well, you know, what we value. So if we look at the conjunction here, we have the conjunction with Lilith here, and then we had another conjunction with the Sun and the Neptune. We had Mercury in the sign of Aquarius at that time, 28 degrees, which would have been, you know, it's like shocking as well, because Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. So if we look, you know, the connection, Mercury is the ruler of Venus, here. So Venus rule, not for, sorry, Venus rules, let me get this right actually. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini and Virgo. That's what I'm trying to say. So Mercury would have ruled that moon here, and the moon was in Virgo, and the sun was in Pisces, which is to do, you know, also the ruler of Pisces is Neptune. So fascinating chart. And with this here, this was showing us the breakdown of patriarchal rule. The last time that Pluto and Saturn were in the sign of Capricorn together was in the Reformation, which would have been in the 1500s. So if we then take this chart, and I'm going to go forward by weeks because the moon takes 28 days on average to move around the chart. So we had that moon, and then we all went on lockdown, and then Mars would have begun to move over these planets, which is like a can opener. So Jupiter is to do with it's to do with overseas travel, it's to do with higher education, it's to do with religious and spiritual beliefs, it can also be to do with dogma. Jupiter rules the sign of Sagittarius, so you know, the nomad and the, you know, basically the collector of information as well. And also Pluto is to do with birth, death, transformation, transmutation. It's where it pulls the rug on us. If you know, it's forcing us. If we don't follow along, if we're resisting, you know, what we resist persists. And then Saturn is to do with our structure. So everything we see in front of us, like the table you might have in front of you, your laptop, or whatever you've got in front of you, is very Saturnian. And we've also got our bones and our teeth. This is to do with Saturn. It's to do with patriarchy, rule. It's to do with father, the bigger picture, not just our, you know, natural birth father. It's the bigger idea of father, patriarchal rule. So these planets together were really, you know, they've really begun to break down patriarchal rule. This is what's going on. We had the fall of the Roman Empire. You might like to look at the understanding of that, because that went on when there was as the Roman Empire, the fall of the Roman Empire was having Pluto, what was called a Pluto return. You know, I think that happened a couple of times for them. And it was quite a barbaric time. You know, there was a lot of grandiosity, but it was also contained a lot of barbarism as well, quite a lot of cruelty in that time, and misuse of rulership as well, misuse of power. So very fascinating. So let's go weeks ahead here, and then I'm going to tie it up shortly, this video. So we're going to go 1, 2. So you see Mars, it went over Jupiter, it's gone over Pluto, and that would have been the 23rd of March. And then it would have gone over Saturn, and that would have been the 6th of April. And I want to push this chart forward because when we had the Floyd thing in the USA, we were, you know, when people were kneeling and people were, you know, it was a very odd time. Like everybody started kneeling, and you know, that there was the idea of the martyr and the, you know, the Christ type figure, the Christ consciousness, what was going on there weeks ahead. So I'm just going to keep going. That's the 4th of May. And then we go to the 25th of May. So we have that period there. And we had a lot of the 1st of June. We had all of the you know, the Black Lives Matter, that all of that marching, where millions and millions, we can't forget these things, you know, like unprecedented, the amount of people that came out. So I'm not into politics. I'm into the soul journey and the evolution of mankind and my own evolution. I'm very fascinated, you know, what is my purpose? What am I here to, what is my legacy? We don't all have to have a legacy, but I think the purpose of being here is to definitely, you know, make some form of changes that are beneficial to mankind. I can't see any other reason in the bigger picture for me. I don't think I'm just here to live and die, and it's not all about possession of things either. It's a journey from our wounding, our hypersensitivity to, you know, very much for me as well, you know, leaving here with a clean slate. If I've had past lives, I don't know what they were personally, but if I imagined that I've been given a role, you know, what do I want this life to be? So we're all different, and our charts will throw up and show us, you know, our journey. And my chart shows my journey is, you know, passing on information to people via media and the internet, and looking at the depths of psychology and looking at how we evolve and helping people to do that as best I possibly can, with bringing some positivity and joy into that as well, not all doom and gloom, regardless of what happens to us and how painful an event can be, that we begin to evolve. So let's go, that's the 1st of June, and we're looking at Mars. So then Mars went over the 15th of June, it went over Neptune. And we could see from this chart, the astrologers that I know, that we were going to have a lot of struggle in and out of lockdown and such like. The virus is to do with Neptune. We can't see, as an example, we can't see COVID. We can't see it. With Neptune, it's the unknown, the unseen, beyond this realm. And also we can't see racism, as an example. You know, we can't see the psyche of man. That's another example. We can't see cruelty. You know, we can see it in action when it happens to us, but we can't really see the psyche of another human being. We can then see that Mars went over Chiron in June, the end of June. And we begin to then have a very tricky time in July with the squares. We can see that, you know, what was going on here. When Mars was going forward, it would have begun to square all of this up here, which would have caused a lot of, you know, tension in us. We've been through a hell of a time, let's face it. So we can see that we still have the conjunction with Lilith, which is the shadow, and, you know, the wanting to speak up and say, hey, you know, we've had enough. So then we would have had the conjunction with this, it would have gone over Chiron, which is our wound, which would have felt very uncomfortable. And this is August. For some reason, I'm concentrating on Mars, but we'll go with it. And then we've got the Mars and Lilith, and they've been dancing together. And then Mars went retrograde, which, if we look at Mars here, it went retrograde for 10 weeks. So we go back, it went back to 15 degrees, and then it went forward again. So we're not the 7th of December, we're the 25th. And where we're at now, the 23rd of November, this chart, we can see that Mars is going to be moving on into the Lilith and also to Uranus. And as Mars goes forward, it's going to square all of this again. So we've got more tension coming. So look, this is the 23rd of November, 24th, 25th, we got 18 degrees. We can see the square begins to kick back in. And we can see here the 14th of December, the squaring to Pluto and Jupiter up here. And we go forward and we've got the 21st of December. So inauguration is the day before. And we can see what the chart looks like here. We've got Mercury will be conjunct the Sun. And we've also got the Moon. Let's actually go back one day to this 20th of December. So this is the chart of the inauguration. I believe I've got that date right. I'm in the UK, that's why I'm saying that. So we've got the Moon is going to be conjuncting Neptune. So that can cause a lot of confusion, you know, in our minds. And we've got the squares going on to Mars at 22 degrees. It's conjuncting Pluto, not conjuncting, squaring Pluto. And it's in a weaker square with Jupiter up here. And on that day as well, we've got the Jupiter Saturn moving into Aquarius. The last time it was in Aquarius, conjunct was in the year 1206, I believe. I might have my dates wrong there, but we can see up here that we've got Mercury conjunct the Sun in Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is to do, you know, with the past as well and the bigger picture. So fascinating what's going on. And if we go, let's go days ahead till the end of the year. I want you to watch Mars as it's moving on in to hit here. Mars is moving 1 degree, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we have this here going on 6 degrees, 6 degrees. So they're going to be conjunct and they're all going to be hitting the planets up here. This is a difficult time ahead of us. So we have to be maintained somehow with the ego self. So hopefully this links in what I've said about Carl Jung, and that you get something out of this, because it's just my own thoughts and how I put things together. And hopefully from this, something the puzzle of the pieces of the puzzle begin to sort of form a shape for you of what's going on. So it's not going to be, hardship forever. But clearly, in order to evolve, we have to have a breakdown of something, because the way we were operating pre-COVID was not really the way we should be living in humanity, with all of the things that go on. Okay, that's it. And I'll be back in a couple of days with something else for you. Thanks for watching.